ceremony to the Spencer family home, where she will be laid to rest. This morning, her sons, Princes William and Harry, accompanied by their father, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Edinburgh, and Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, walked behind the coffin on the last stage of its journey to Westminster Abbey. Breaking with convention, Earl Spencer used his funeral tribute to criticise the royal family and renew his attack on the media. First, our correspondent David Loyne reports on the events of the morning.
With military precision, but the minimum of military pomp, Diana began her final journey. There was some crying and shouts of bless you at the start, but most of the crowd preferred to watch and mourn in silence as the coffin travelled the 4-mile route from her London home, Kensington Palace, where it had rested overnight, to Westminster Abbey. Stripped of all the usual trappings of a royal funeral, with just her pallbearers from the Welsh Guards and horses led by the King's troop, it made its solitary journey. Lonely, but not alone, for the people whose pressure has forced so many changes in the arrangements this week have come out in force today, lining the route which was lengthened so that more could see. At Buckingham Palace, which has become a shrine, the Queen led other members of the royal family to pay their respects at the side of the road, just like thousands of her subjects were doing. And with them, the Duchess of York, who shared so much with Diana. The 3 wreaths on the coffin were from Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, and her 2 sons, the Princes William and Harry. One carried only the single word, Mummy. And then, for the 2 boys, the hardest moment of their young lives. Walking with their father, uncle and grandfather, following the coffin for the last part of this sad journey. And behind them, not dignitaries or soldiers or marching bands, but 500 invited members of Diana's charities. The flexibility and spontaneity and care she showed in her life, reflected now after her death. Earl Spencer put a consoling arm around Prince Harry's shoulder at Horse Guards before they came out again into the sunlight of Whitehall. There was little formal protocol in the guest list for Westminster Abbey. Luciano Pavarotti arrived to applause from the crowd. He said he was too upset to sing. Elton John would sing. He came with George Michael. And there were other friends of the Princess of Wales, Richard Branson and Lord Attenborough, as well as more expected members of the British establishment, the Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition and Foreign Secretary, among others. Mohammed Al Fayed, the father of Dodi, who was Diana's companion on the day she died, arrived visibly moved. And the Queen Mother came separately from most of her family. She is as old as the century and can never have believed that she would see this day. But this was not the royal family's day, it was the Spencers. Diana's mother and her 2 sisters were closely involved in deciding the order of service. Diana's favourite hymn, sung at her wedding and now at her funeral.
In her life,
the Dean of Westminster led the prayers, urging those who listened to commit themselves as Diana had to caring for others. The Prime Minister read a lesson, and Diana's sisters read short poems. And after this long week, Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, only just managed to finish a powerful and passionate tribute.
I would like to end by thanking God for the small mercies he's shown us at this dreadful time, for taking Diana at her most beautiful and radiant, and when she had joy in her private life. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister, the unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
Goodbye, England's rose. May you ever grow in our hearts. You are the grace that placed yourselves where lives were torn apart. You called out to our country, and you whispered to those in pain. Now you belong to heaven, and the stars spell out your name.
The coffin paused at the end of the church for a minute of silence, observed here and across the land. Then Diana's coffin went on its long journey, taking her home to Althorpe. The most modern of women, on a progress across Britain with almost medieval overtones. Flowers strew her way. David Loyne, BBC News.
Earl Spencer's funeral oration highlighted differences between Princess Diana and the royal family about how her son should be brought up. He pledged that he, his mother and sisters, whom he called Diana's blood family, would do all they could to ensure that the two young princes were not simply immersed in duty and tradition, but could, as he put it, sing openly as Diana had planned. Earl Spencer also took the opportunity to launch a bitter attack on what he called the media's permanent quest to bring the princess down. Gavin Esler reports.
Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, walked to the Abbey behind her coffin, flanked by his two nephews, Princes Harry and William, the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Charles. But he used the platform of his address to the mourners in the Abbey throughout Britain and across the world, not merely to celebrate his sister's remarkable achievements, but also to refer pointedly to her frustrations with royal life.
Diana was the very essence of compassion, of duty, of style, of beauty. All over the world, she was a symbol of selfless humanity, a standard bearer for the rights of the truly downtrodden, a very British girl who transcended nationality, someone with a natural nobility who was classless, and who proved in the last year that she needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic.
He spoke of her as a very insecure person whose eating disorders were a symptom of vulnerability, the most bizarre life imaginable, he called it, which led her to consider exile from Britain.
There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum.
Then, standing not far from the royal family and with hundreds of millions of viewers watching in central London and on worldwide television, Earl Spencer directly raised the unhappiness at the core of her life, promising the young princes would not be suffocated by the strains of royal duty.
She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. And beyond that, on behalf of your mother and sisters, I pledge that we, your blood family, will do all we can to continue the imaginative and loving way in which you are steering these two exceptional young men, so that their souls are not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned. We fully respect the heritage into which they have both been born, and will always respect and encourage them in their royal role. But we, like you, recognize the need for them to experience as many different aspects of life as possible, to arm them spiritually and emotionally for the years ahead.
In a week when protocol has repeatedly been shredded, Earl Spencer's remarks produce thunderous applause at a funeral. And their implications will echo beyond these walls, this ceremony and the crowds of mourners into the future of the monarchy itself. Gavin Esler, BBC News.
Tens of thousands of people spent the night along the procession route to secure a vantage point to watch the funeral cortege. Many based themselves at Kensington Palace to witness the start of the procession. Our court correspondent Clarence Mitchell was there.
As dawn roused slumbering mourners at Kensington Palace, the crowds here knew that what they were about to witness would be painful. But in the respectful silence of their anticipation, there was unity, a sense that they had to be here. Behind Diana's former home, the gun carriage that would convey her coffin before the eyes of millions around the world was being readied. The horses to draw her at rest before performing their solemn duty. And when Diana began her journey to her final resting place, the cortege moving through the people. For some, it was overwhelming.
It was beautiful, though. Elegant. It was... I kept thinking I knew that I knew it had happened, but I realized I still was in shock until I saw it.
It was a very sad occasion. I don't think this country is going to see anything this sad for a long time.
Can you describe your emotions as she went by?
Not really. I can't.
To pay their respects, to mark Diana's passing, to simply say goodbye to their princess. That's why everyone here came onto the streets in such numbers. Witnessing the cortege was, for many, the culmination of the week's profound emotions.
Goodbye, Rose. May you ever grow in our hearts.
And for the thousands watching the service on huge video screens at Hyde Park, the involvement was total. This was the tribute so many wanted for Diana, the woman whose radiance touched people across the world, her life being celebrated in the sunshine of a late summer's day. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News.
Well, now a brief look at other news. Large crowds have gathered in Calcutta to pay their last respects to Mother Teresa, who died of a heart attack last night. Thousands of people have been waiting in heavy rain outside the headquarters of the Missionaries of Charity, which she founded nearly 50 years ago to help the poor of the city. Her funeral will be held next Saturday. And the conductor, Sir George Solti, one of the world's most highly respected musicians, has died at the age of 84. Sir George, a Hungarian who took British nationality in 1974, was known for his energetic conducting style. For 10 years he was music director at the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, and after that he worked with many of the world's leading orchestras. He was on holiday in the south of France when he died. Astronauts on Mir failed to find any sign of a leak during a 5.5-hour spacewalk today. Michael Foley and Anatoly Solyov examined 2 areas of the hull damaged in a collision with a supply ship last June, but couldn't find the puncture. They did manage to realign some of the solar panels that power the ship. That's all from the newsroom for the moment. Back now to David Dimbleby at Westminster Abbey.
And here outside Westminster Abbey we will continue to watch the funeral cortege, the hearse that's taking the princess up to Northampton for her burial later this afternoon. And we'll be hearing from people who've followed the hearse when it left Kensington Palace and came to Westminster Abbey, and when it went from Westminster Abbey on its way through North London, hear from people about their reaction to what was said and to the service itself. But I'm joined here now by somebody who was inside the Abbey, the distinguished figure of Lord Attenborough. Just tell us what it was like, first of all, to be part of that service.
Well, I think it meant an enormous amount, David, to people who were close to her. I've known her for 15 years and really knew her quite well. And what I found most remarkable was the extraordinary judgment in assembling the service. It seemed there was the Requiem of Out of My Country, Cum Ronda, Elton. It seemed to me marvellous. I thought the 2 readings by the 2 sisters finish those, complete those dear unfinished tasks of mine, was a phrase that one of them used. I thought Charles Spencer was very remarkable, and I've never been at an occasion such as that where the whole congregation applauded with such affirmation of what he had to say, of how important it was that we recognized the impact that she had, and the fact that what she did, although she was the height of fashion and the height of fame, what she actually did in her driven life was to deal with things which were not in fashion. Who first started to pay attention to lepra sufferers, to AIDS, to homeless, etc. And as for her cause against landmines, which I was very much involved with right from the word go, I think that's absolutely marvellous. I gather there's the possibility that the international treaty may even be called the Princess Diana Treaty. And if those sort of things are followed through, if those of us who really loved her very much continue to back the causes that she believed in, then a part of her life has not been wasted. I mean, we miss her. I've never known. Have you a national experience such as this?
No,
I mean,
no.
It's unique, it's extraordinary, and I thought, as I said, that Lord Spencer was very courageous in what he had to say, and very proper.
The Blood family will look after the children and bring them up in the way that she would have wanted,
yes.
Was in effect what he was saying.
Yes, well, she never stopped saying that. I mean, you've been to her Kensington Palace as much as I have. The pictures in her rooms and so on were of famous figures and of the royal family, but overriding everything were pictures with her and of the boys. I mean, that's what mattered. That's what mattered beyond everything else, and all the things that she believed in, and her concerns and caring for ordinary people, and the fact that without experiencing that, without seeing the life that really existed on the streets and out of the limelight, which she did, the boys would never quite be able to bring that change of style and attitude and content, which is so important if our Constitution is to continue in its present form.
So do you think that Charles Spencer's plea will be heeded?
I think it will. I would have thought that the Queen's broadcast 2 days ago, which I thought was very remarkable, and a complete recognition of what the nation was feeling, contained elements within it which were totally against normal protocol. I think, if I remember correctly, the Queen actually said we must not forget the things that Princess Diana stood for. And I would have thought that there were enough people. I mean, I know that Elton, for instance, I know Mohammed Al-Fayed, I know that a number of people are determined that these funds that are being assembled shall be used not necessarily in the most obvious not for the most obvious sources, but used to do work and back circumstances and analyze and then act upon that analysis of the things which distressed her. And the things that distressed her were people who were helpless, people who had no voice. And this drive that was part of her being, which is forced upon her by this young, shy woman who was thrown into this cauldron and suddenly had to cope with. In fact, although her life was tragic in many ways, in that it lacked happiness, it nevertheless, I think, fired her. It granted her the drive and the determination to see through what she believed was so important. And the most important for all were her two sons, the two boys, and the manner in which they lived their lives in the future and brought their influence upon the nation.
Lord Attenborough, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Well, now the procession is still on its way up the motorway. We have a glimpse of it there from a helicopter as it goes on. A few people on the side of the road who live locally, no doubt, have found their way there, or who are driving in cars. The cars on the southbound carriageway having been stopped. People are parking their cars on the side and going across the motorway. to watch the hearse go past. So all the way, even on these bleakest of motorway roads, people have found a way of coming and standing to watch as the hearse goes past. It goes alone because the members of the Spencer family and those members of the royal family who are travelling up to Northampton are going by a royal train, which will be arriving later on, and then they'll be taken separately to Althorpe House. And through the cornfields of late summer, this hearse bearing the body of the princess carries on its slow, steady journey northwards. We might now hear more from people who've been taking part here in London. Over 1 million, we're told, by the police, listening to the service and watching the processions. Let's join Kate Adie, who's been outside Buckingham Palace.
Buckingham Palace is the place which so often has witnessed royal celebrations of thousands of people here gathered normally on a very happy occasion. And today has been so very different, but yet with huge numbers. And thousands streamed in here early this morning, and there was an immense crowd gathered. And it was very intense and very focused, and that could be seen on the first reaction there was when the Union flag was flown at half-mast from the Buckingham Palace flagpole this morning. There was an enormous, sudden, instantaneous applause from the crowd. It was a genuine sign of satisfaction that something that had been asked for had actually happened, as a very visible sign of public mourning. And then later, when the Queen led virtually all the royal family out from a side gate of Buckingham Palace, there was this very curious sight of thousands of people lining one side of the street, and the royal family, as it were, lining the other side. Again, there was a ripple of applause when they came out, which died away very quickly for everyone to stand in silence, because it was only a minute or so later that the cortege came past. And then during the service, you had here such a large gathering of people, and it's very unusual, particularly in this country, I think, in the open air, in bright sunshine, for people to stand so quietly. And they did follow the service very intently, listening so carefully as it was relayed. A lot of people joined in the Lord's Prayer, and there was such crying during Elton John's singing as well, and applause again at the end of that. It was as if everyone was listening as an individual, yet taking part united together. Not in any way a matter of emotional hysteria, not in any way, just very private grief, but everybody standing close together. And now, some time after, as it were, the ceremony is all over, this place is again a focus of attention. People have been drawn here, and there are, of course, the tens of thousands of flowers which are still in front of the palace. It's a beautiful sight, and there are candles there and the messages, and there are a lot of people who've taken their time now to come to this very heart, this very centre of royal occasions, to look at it.
And now let's go around the country and hear what's been happening outside this city. We've heard a great deal from London this morning. Let's first of all go to Cardiff and join Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, David. Well, here in the capital city of Wales, in the small village of Llandaff, with its village green, both inside and outside the great cathedral here, there have been extraordinarily moving scenes. We've had over 2,000 people here this morning. During the minute's silence, you could have heard a pin drop, I suppose, and I'm sure that would be the same for everywhere around the country. But there's really been a very special feeling here in Wales because it is the capital city. And she was, after all, much loved to everyone, but also very much the Princess of Wales, and felt very much to be the Princess of Wales by the people who come here today. People have come out from the cathedral. We've obviously had the simultaneous service from the Abbey, and they haven't really wanted to go straight away. They've stayed, They've been very emotional, they wanted to speak, they wanted to talk amongst each other. And here we are, still here, it's clouded over, but we're here on the green, and I have with me some ladies who are in the cathedral. Carol, Valerie and Jennifer, what do you think of the service?
I thought it was very, very moving, particularly the 1 minute silence. You really could not hear a thing.
It was so dignified, very dignified.
The tribute from her brother, Noel Spencer,
that
was the most moving thing.
A very emotional experience indeed to be there. You were all inside the cathedral, and there were so many more outside following closely in absolute silence.
It was wonderful inside. It had a wonderful atmosphere with everybody so... I mean, it was very tearful. People were emotionally involved with it. It was incredible.
And it was exactly the same as obviously the Abbey service, but for one thing, we had the Welsh national anthem at the end.
I know it in Welsh, you see, even though I'm English.
I'm sorry, I don't. I must do it one day, I must learn.
Do you feel that in some sense it has helped you to be here today, to be with everybody else and to share your emotions?
Oh yes, definitely. When it happened, it was about 7:30 in the morning. A friend of mine rang and told me the news, and because I was still quite bleary-eyed, it didn't quite sink in. But I was on my own, and the children were still in bed, and I just sat there devastated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to ring friends in case they thought I was being silly. So something like this, where we've all pulled together and we've all shared this really deep, tragic emotion, and it's wonderful.
Jennifer, you come this morning from Pembrokeshire, which actually is quite a long way from here, at least a couple of hours. What made you want to come? How special an experience was it for you to be here?
I just felt the deep need to be here today. I couldn't explain it no other way than a need that will remain with me, the memory will remain with me forever.
Valerie, what about you?
Well, I'm disabled, a little disabled, I say, and I couldn't go to deliver flowers or put them anywhere. I had no method of transport or anything like that. And to come to the cathedral was wonderful when the opportunity turned up. And it came through the post and it said you have a place. I was thrilled, absolutely.
What sort of repercussions do you think the Princess of Wales's death will have? Obviously we've heard a great deal about her life. We've all closely followed what happened in London this morning, but what difference do you think it's going to make now?
I think it's going to inspire a lot of people to pull together. I mean, we've seen tremendous national unity over the last week, and I think it's going to carry on.
Thank you all of you very much indeed. In the meantime, back to you, David.
And the hearse is now reaching Luton on the M1, and the same scene, the south-going carriageway, all the traffic has been stopped, while the cortege heading north passes safely by. And still more flowers being thrown across the motorway as the crowd surges forward. Far more people turning out here than have ever been seen for any royal procession or marriage or indeed any other funeral. People who have a chance only to see a passing car and yet have come in their hundreds to the motorway bridges, to the junctions, just to catch that one brief glimpse. There could be no better tribute from a people than this. Over the brow of the hill and still heading on north. And we'll no doubt catch up with it again later on, but we heard from Wales. Let's now go to Northern Ireland and hear what's been happening today in Belfast with Dennis Murray.
And we're here at Belfast City Hall, unprecedented scenes there with the funeral cortege, and something I think unprecedented in Northern Ireland as well, the way in which Diana, Princess of Wales, has united this most divided part of the United Kingdom, united them in grief. I'm joined here at the City Hall, and in fact you can possibly see behind me the flowers, people still leaving flowers this morning, people weeping quietly behind me here just a few minutes ago. I'm joined here now by Nathan Chambers, by Liz McIlkearney and by Belfast Lord Mayor Albal McGuinness. Now Nathan, you were injured in the Enniskillen bombing, the IRA attack on the Poppy Day ceremony in Enniskillen in the late 1980s. You were injured then and you were visited in hospital by the Princess. What did the visit mean to you? What did she say to you?
Basically the visit was unbelievable. We couldn't believe that the VIP of such an important person was coming to see us, and she was just concerned in how I was getting on. There wasn't much pain, what my injuries were, and she just hoped that I got better soon. And she was just genuinely concerned and very, very loving and compassionate.
And how much of a morale boost was that at what must have been a very difficult time?
Well, up until then, you were just thinking of your injuries and how much pain you were in, but when you realised somebody important was coming, you forgot all about that and you were just so excited and so over the moon.
And did all the rest of the patients as well recover?
Definitely. It helped me recover.
Liz, you're a senior manager at the Ulster Hospital at Dundonald, just outside Belfast. In fact, the Princess had her last public engagement there in 1993. What was the visit about and what happened there?
She had come to open our newly refurbished children's unit at the Ulster Hospital, and we were quite worried that she wouldn't be able to come because just the week before we had heard the announcement that she was stepping away from public life. But because it was a children's unit and because it was sick children, she agreed to come and do it, so we were overjoyed.
And everyone's talked about this amazing communication she had with children.
Yes, she had a very special affinity with the children. Before her visit we asked what she would like as a gift, and she said that she would like just 2 drawings from the children. And on the day that she visited, it was as if she couldn't get the unveiling ceremony performed quickly enough to get down on her knees and chat to the children about their drawings.
And one of the children tried to make off with her earring, I believe.
That's right. She had picked a child up out of its cot, and he had pulled off this lovely golden pearl earring and popped it in its mouth. And she just laughed, took it out, wiped it on her coat and put it back on again.
Well, if I can turn to you, Albal, on a slightly more serious note, you're the first nationalist Lord Mayor of Belfast. That's right. But the Princess's death really does seem to have united people. There's a message on the railings around the City Hall here which says she was a princess of all denominations.
Very much so. I think that she had a universal appeal, and it's been made very clear to me by people from both sides of the religious and political divide in Belfast how much they loved her, how deep their affection was for her. She had a universal appeal, I think, probably because she had a common touch. I think she touched people's hearts, and I think that she was an international humanitarian. Her work for people who were suffering from AIDS, a charity that she didn't have to embrace, and for her to actually physically help people who were suffering from AIDS, to look after people in that direct way, I think won people over. And of course, her latter campaign in relation to those people who suffered the terrible trauma and injury of anti-personnel landmines, that was a magnificent campaign and something that people really associated with.
Well, people would relate to that here, a city, a province that's had more than its fair share of sudden bereavement.
Very much so indeed. And but there is a genuine feeling here of sadness. It goes right across the political divide, and it's unmistakable.
Okay, Nathan, very quickly, just to all of you, you all said the ceremony this morning was very moving.
Oh yes, very moving indeed.
Yes, I thought Elton John's singing was just so wonderful, superb.
all of you in Belfast, thank you very much indeed.
Dennis Murray there. Now I'm joined by somebody very famous who lives in Ireland, the singer Krista Berg, who was one of the princess's most favourite, and perhaps her most favourite singer. He's just been telling me that when The Lady in Red was played, she always insisted it was played 2 or 3 times over. Now you've written a tribute. We heard Elton John's tribute to her in the Abbey, but you've written your own tribute to her too. Tell us about that.
Well, I was in the Czech Republic on Sunday morning doing a, a concert for the flood victims, and I heard the absolutely desperate news. And I was supposed to be in Moscow this weekend for the 850th anniversary, doing some shows there. I didn't have the heart, and during the week I spoke to Sarah, Duchess of York, and she obviously was completely destroyed by the terrible news. And later on Wednesday evening I was playing my piano, and I hadn't intended to write a piece of music, but something emerged. And about 10 minutes after I got a line, I rang up Sarah again on her mobile phone, and by coincidence she was on her way to view the coffin of her dearest friend and sister-in-law. And I told the line, which was, "You are shining like a million suns, and there's a new star up in heaven tonight." And the Duchess was so taken by this line that when she signed the book of condolence, she signed her name with this line underneath it. And the next day she rang me up and said, "What are you going to do about this personal tribute?" And I said, "Well, I hadn't planned to do anything." She said, "Well, you should finish it, even if just to send to the young princess." So kind of reluctantly I continued, but then I got behind it, and I'm very pleased with the result. And it really is as a result of her inspiration, Diana's inspiration, and her great friend's suggestion that I carry the thing through.
And Sarah wants this seen as her own private tribute to the princess.
I think it's my private tribute, but Sarah Ferguson is very much involved with the encouragement behind it.
And so you recorded it when?
Last night.
Just last night?
Yeah, just a voice and piano version.
We have a recording of it, so let's just hear this tribute from Krista Berg.
The shadows darken and the day is done, and I cannot believe that it's true and you are gone. You were always here beside me. You gave so much as the Queen of Hearts to those without love. You were their voice when they could not speak, a touch for the dying. And as we say goodbye, I can hardly see for the tears in my eyes. You are shining like a million suns, and there's a new star up in heaven tonight. I wonder if you ever knew how much you were loved, and in the darkness of a lonely room, were you empty inside? And as you fade away, it's like a light has gone from the world, but I am sure that there is a place where it will burn on forever. And as we say goodbye, I can hardly see for the tears in my eyes. You are shining like a million suns, and there's a new star up in heaven tonight. There's a new star up in heaven tonight.
Well, the first performance of Christa Berg's There's a New Star Up in Heaven Tonight. Thank you very much for that. Tell us about the service itself. What was your reaction to what you heard in the Abbey today?
I think the word that springs to mind is awesome. It's an experience that I will never forget. And one moment in particular encapsulates, I think, the love that everybody had for her. After Earl Spencer's tribute, we in the Abbey could hear the applause outside here, and suddenly it seemed to come through the west door, up the nave, and everybody just started clapping right through the Abbey, all the way up to her coffin.
So it was picked up from the streets outside.
We heard them clapping, and I got a chill, and I wanted to put my hands together, but somebody obviously close to the door decided enough's enough, this is the people's princess, and started clapping, and the thing just came like a wave. It was, and I had tears pouring down my face, as did a lot of people. It was an emotional moment I'll never forget.
What did you think of the words that Charles Spencer spoke?
They were spoken from a position of love and anger. I would love to read what he's written again. I also particularly enjoyed Elton's version of Candle in the Wind. But the Earl obviously is a man who has strong feelings about the way his sister was hounded by the media for all those years. He obviously knew better than most of us her vulnerability as well. And for me, certainly one of her most attractive features was her vulnerability, allied to the fact she knew she was a star, and everybody she touched and everybody she came near went away feeling they were special.
And do you think that feeling will last? The strength of emotion we've seen this week in London suggests that she reached very deep into people's imagination and into their hearts. Do you think it will last, or do you think within a week or 2 or 3 that sort of spirit that we've seen today will fade, as it's so often faded in the past?
David, last night my wife and I walked around Parliament Square and Westminster Abbey, and to see those people, young children, old people, camped out for the night, there was an atmosphere of calm and silence. I feel that what will happen in the future is that Diana's spirit will actually grow larger. It won't be as so visible as it is right now, but I think the power of her love and the power of her name and what she has done for the world, she will be canonized almost in people's hearts and memories.
And canonization, of course, is what her brother said she didn't need.
She didn't need it, but I think she's going to get it.
Mr. Berg, thank you very much. Well, now let's hear about the next stage of the journey this afternoon of the hearse and of the royal family in particular. George Eakin is at the railway station at Long Buckby, where the royal train will shortly arrive. George, do you have any information about when it'll be arriving there, or what will happen when it gets there?
Well, we understand that the train is expected at about 5 or 10 past 2. It'll pull up here at this quiet rural station, and we expect Prince Charles, the 2 princes, Princess Diana's 2 sisters and her brother to disembark, and they will then come down the steps behind me at the station and get into 3 or 4 official mourning cars that have already been parked up ready to drive them the 5 miles or so from here to the Althorpe estate. As you can see, there is a crowd already forming here. There are many more up the road behind the camera waiting to give their support, in particular, they say, to the 2 princes.
Thank you very much. Well, we will be there, of course, when that train arrives. But now let's go to another, perhaps rather unexpected in a way, around our visits. We haven't yet been to Scotland. We'll be going to Scotland soon. But a rather unexpected spot to stop. And that's a place where people who are away from home have been this week, heard the news on Sunday, and have been on their summer holidays. It's Blackpool, and in Blackpool is Wendy Robbins. Wendy.
I'll be getting reaction to the service in just a few minutes, but here in Blackpool, along with everyone else in the country, they've been glued to their television sets. And when the national silence came, it was well observed in Blackpool. It was clearly emotional for some in the audience. The tram stopped, and so did the buses. It was a time for reflection for young and old. Behind me are some of the people who've been watching the service all afternoon here in Blackpool, some Blackpool residents and others who are staying actually in this hotel. Marie, what was your most memorable moment in the funeral today?
Earl Spencer's speech.
Why?
Because he delivered the nation's message. He spoke of how we all feel. It was right. It was just perfect. It was everything we wanted for her.
What did he say exactly that sort of touched your heart?
The way that he would keep an involvement with the princes. The way that, you know, yes, she was human. She made mistakes, but we all do.
Diana, do you think, as the palace promised, that this has been a unique funeral for a unique person?
Yes, I do. And also, the song that Elton John sang was absolutely wonderful. He said it all.
What did you think of the combination of Elton John playing that song, followed by that speech by Earl Spencer?
That was brilliant, because as soon as he sang the song and Earl Spencer delivered his speech, the emotions of everybody, it just touched everybody. And I think it's what she'd have wanted.
Now, you're on holiday here in Blackpool.
Yes.
Where are you from?
Bradford, Yorkshire.
And you've spent the whole afternoon of your holiday here watching the service.
Yes.
Were there any particular memorable words this afternoon that really struck you?
Well, I think it was when he was saying he would look after the children, Earl Spencer. I mean, he spoke for everybody, but he said he would look after the children and see they had as normal an upbringing as was possible.
Now, what the palace also promised with this funeral was that it would be a chance for the nation to unite in grief, but also to give thanksgiving for Diana's life. Do you feel it achieved that so far?
Oh, I think so, yes, yes.
How do you think that people have reacted all day?
Well, they've shown their grief, and I think they've shown the royal family that it needed to be done, you know.
And lastly, what's your most memorable moment of the funeral?
I think it was Earl Spencer's speech.
Thank you very much.
The royal train heading north, approaching Long Buckby, the stop on the way between Northampton and Rugby, where the members of the Spencer family and, more important of all than all perhaps, the two children of the princess will get out of the train and be taken to Althorpe House. George Eakin is there, and George, we can see the train approaching now. Is there a crowd gathering there?
We're still waiting, David, for the train to appear. You've just seen a picture of it making its way through the countryside near here. Police and bodyguards are ready to receive the royal party. They'll disembark from the train, which is in a setting, the station is in a sort of cutting raised above the ground level, hidden by trees largely. So the first we'll see of them is when they come down the steps towards the car park and make their way towards the mourning cars, which will take them to the Althorpe estate.
I didn't hear you before say this, but is there a crowd waiting there, or is this one of these unexpected changes to the schedule that has caught everybody on the hop slightly?
A mixture of both. There is a crowd. We understand Prince Charles wanted, in his words, no fuss at this stage, but there is a crowd who've come to show support to the Prince and his two young sons, and we're still waiting for the train to actually pull up.
Were these people who've come after watching the service on television, have you been able to talk to them about their reaction to the events in London?
Only briefly, but the feeling is that it was a very moving service, and certainly making my way here, the countryside, the villages en route were totally deserted. Nobody was out on the roads, with the exception of the motorway. Total desertion. People were inside their houses, virtually all of them watching the service, and they've said that they found it a very moving occasion.
How long a journey is it for them then to the house from here?
5 miles only and across country, so one would have thought about 10 minutes at the most from here to Althorpe.
And are there people lining the route all the way?
I can tell you there are people lining at least the first half mile or so well up into the village, and a large group waiting for them at the top of the road, so they'll pass many supporters here to lend them moral support and show that they appreciate the bravery that, in particular, the two young princes have been showing today.
We can see a very big crowd along the left-hand side of the road there, leading away from the station.
Indeed, and there is a larger crowd at the top of the road where there's a square where many other people have gathered.
Brian Hanrahan is nearer Althorpe House itself. Brian, are large crowds gathering there this afternoon?
There are, we think, about 1,000 people outside Althorpe House itself. You can see them still on either side of the gates where the flowers have been moved back in order to allow the cars to come in. And there are more people back along the route to the M1. It's hard to estimate because they're not thronging the route, or certainly not at the moment, but there's a steady group of people. I mean, I think you would find there's one every 3 or 4 paces, and then there are clusters of them in at the villages and around the pubs, places where it's easier to stand and wait. But there are a few people along the route the entire way, although it's not crowded with people in the way that you see it is here. It does seem that there's been a kind of...
Brian, what is the exact arrangement, as you understand it, when the hearse arrives here at Althorpe? Is there going to be any kind of service in the church, or is the whole committal service, as I've heard, going to be conducted on the island where the burial will take place?
As I understand it, the hearse will turn into the gates will close, and it will not come out of the estate again. The church is on the other side of the estate, and if there was going to be a service there, it would have to come out into public roads again, and then come back to the estate. And I can't see any reason why that should happen. There's already been a church service, of course, at Westminster Abbey, and now this is simply the burial service, which we expect to take place on the island in the centre of the lake in Althorpe Park, the whole idea being to make sure that it is private and that nobody else except those intended to be there are there.
So our last glimpse of the coffin will be as it drives through these gates?
It will indeed, and I think that is the point at which the Earl has asked people not to impinge on his family's privacy after it has gone in. He's accepted that there is, although the family did initially wish for a completely private ceremony, they have accepted that the nation should be accepted as witnesses because of the great affection which has been shown to the princess, but he has asked that the public interest should stop at the gates, and it does seem from the way in which people are not turning up here in vast numbers. I mean, there are plenty of them, but it's not the huge crowds that at one point the police feared. It does seem that local people are respecting the wishes of the Earl and not overcrowding and pushing too hard in on his estate.
It's just after 2 o'clock, and in a few minutes' time we expect the royal train to arrive with the royal mourners at Long Buckby, and of course we will go there as soon as that happens. In the meantime, we rejoin Krishna Gurumurthy, who's in the Mall.